All right, good morning. Thank you for coming. This is post-secondary transition training for the year. That link to your materials is in the chat box. Erin dropped that in there. She will drop that in again for people that log in late. Thank you guys, like I said, for being here. I know there's no real easy time for do this. We'll try to make this as quick and painless as possible for you. My name is Steve Moran. I'm a State Support Team 11 consultant, work mostly in special education and transition. And I have a couple other colleagues on here who I will let introduce themselves as well real quick.
Hi, I'm Erin Curtis. I am new to State Support Team 11. I'm focusing on special education transition, and then I also dabble in preschool a little bit.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kim Legault. I'm also new to State Support Team Region 11, with my focuses being primarily on special education, transition, and data and continuous improvement.
All right. Instead of doing an introduction, since we have a pretty big group and still more expected to sign in, if you can just change your name, if you go to the top right of your picture and hover over it, you will see mute and 3 dots pop up. If you go to the 3 dots, you should be able to see the option to rename yourself down at the bottom there. If you could just tell us your name and where you are from. And if you have any trouble doing that, don't stress over it. It's not a big deal. If you just want to throw your name and introduce yourself in the chat box, that would be great too. As Kim and Erin and myself already introduced ourselves, we also have Joe Fari, who I believe is on this. Joe, I don't know if you want to jump in and say hi to everyone. And then we also have Greg Matthews, who is our associate director, who could be in and out at any time today. And then in our career tech education programming, which is also kind of falls under the special education as his position is designed, is David Bruce. So that's just a little bit about our staff. So you can see our staff. If you have career tech specific questions, Dave Bruce is the guy to go to. Otherwise, any of the other people mentioned are going to be a good resource for you. Just a little bit about today, learning objectives and targets. We want all participants to understand the compliance requirements around transition planning, understand section 5 of the Ohio IEP document, which is that transition section, distinguish between IEP compliance and delivery of service, and familiarize yourself with tools and resources that can be used in transition planning. Does anybody have any questions so far? All right. We might have a couple little built-in breaks. Another thing, we might have a couple little built-in breaks today, but for the most part, we're going to keep it moving just to keep it to 2 hours. If you need to get up and get coffee, run to the restroom, whatever that may be, we totally understand. So don't force yourself to sit there if you need to get up and do something. That is entirely on you. For this first part, I'm just going to show a little video, a little brief overview video of transition from our partners down at Ocali, which also have a great transition resources and library that you guys are able to access. Most of their materials, all of their materials actually are free. So if you go to their website, you'll be able to find stuff, but just enjoy this video. Can you guys see the video or no?
I think you stopped sharing your screen, Steve.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. We are go here.
Hi, I'm Chris Spiller, and I am the program director for the Lifespan Transition Center at Ocali.
And I'm Alex Sporlin from the Department of Education. I'm the OTSP project coordinator, and we're here to tell you 5 things about secondary transition.
It's never too early or too late to start transition planning. You'll talk to a lot of people and they'll tell you, start early. But you know what that means? That means as a child is very young in elementary school, you just start talking about what do you want to do when you grow up? You start talking about being a member of the community. You start looking around at what people do. That's starting early. When you get close to age 14, it starts to be more formal transition planning. But you know what? It's never too late either. So you haven't started. It's okay. Get that team together, whatever age you're looking at, and get started talking about who do you want to be when you grow up? What am I good at? And where do I want to go?
Collaboration. It's important to identify the different local agencies that can help a student and IEP team support that student with their post-school goals and make sure that they are included in the IEP planning process. Those local providers can range from different areas around the state, but traditionally they include local DD boards, OOD offices, CCMEP providers, mental health organizations and counselors, and other local organizations that can provide services and supports to a student after school. It's complex. Sometimes students and families can get overwhelmed preparing for adult world. When the student is in the school system, they generally have one plan, one set of rules, and one roof under which they receive all of their services. Once they transition to adult world, they have multiple agencies that are involved that have different services, different sets of rules, and different plans like the ISP and the IPE. Just know that all transition planning teams are experiencing the same flashes of panic. If you collaborate early, have a dynamic and comprehensive team, and ask a lot of questions, generally those teams feel less anxiety around the transition planning process and have better post-school outcomes. Students' needs, interests, and preferences are different, and they may evolve over the course of the student's life. This is not atypical of other students as well. Just know that every student's journey will be different, which means every outcome may be a little different.
Use backwards planning. Backwards planning means starting with knowing where you're going. Once you know where you're going, then you can identify those experiences, those people that you need to talk to, those classes that you need to take in order to be able to walk the path that you need to get to where you want to be as an adult.
For more information, please go to education.ohio.gov/parents. Under the high school resources page is secondary transition and workforce development.
Also, for more information, go to ocali.org and click on Lifespan Transition Center or the Family Center.
All right, so that was just.
Hi, my name is Sarah from Solberg Consulting, and I'm here to share with you.
Sorry about that. That is just a little quick video for transition. Just outlines 5 major components. Like I said, Ocali does have a lot of great resources for educators and practitioners around a lot of things, but especially around transition planning is one of their go-tos. All right, we back on the slideshow. Everyone can see that. All right, thanks for the nod. All right, keep in mind, transition planning is a required components element for students that are either 14 or turning 14 during the lifespan of that IEP that you are constructing. It is appropriate, if the appropriate is determined by the team, to create a transition plan for a student that might not be 14 is acceptable if the IEP team does agree upon that, but just understand you will be held to all compliance related components despite them not being 14 if you do choose to enter information there. So keep in mind the purpose of IDEA is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them free and appropriate public education or FAPE that emphasizes special ed and related services designed to meet the unique needs. And this is the most important part here. This has to do with the transition piece and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So what does Ohio law say about transition? In the Ohio operating standards, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, transition services beginning no later than the first IEP to be in effect when they turn 14 or younger if determined appropriate by the IEP team and updated annually. And that's on page 120 if people want to reference that, just like in the operating standards, just reiterates what I said before about that transition age. Within that transition planning, appropriate measurable secondary goals based on AATA related to training, education, and an assessment data, and if assessment data supports the need, independent living skills, and that's a team decision. But the key component there is that data supporting or data showing that it's not needed. That needs to be, make sure you have that available. And then appropriate measurable post-secondary goals based on your age-appropriate transition assessment related to integrated employment in a comprehensive environment. What that means is gone are the days of sheltered workshops and sub-minimum wage employability for students with disabilities. They are to be included with the non-disabled workers to the, obviously the greatest extent possible, kind of like LRE, and they are to be given the same opportunities for advancement, raises, promotions, and things like that as appropriate, but no more of the sheltered workshop sub-minimum wage approach to students with disabilities. And lastly, the transition services, including the course of study, need to be designed and constructed in a way that assists the child in reaching those post-secondary goals. Are there any questions there about what the law says? All right. Any IEP meeting, this is a compliance component. Any IEP meeting where transition services are being discussed, it's a must include the following: the purpose of the meeting, indicate that the child has been invited, and whether any outside agency will be invited. We highlighted this part because this is where the compliance part kicks in with that. The student must be invited. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. They must be invited, and that can be indicated on that PRO2, that invitation that's sent home to the parent. There is a box to click or check that will tell you, will indicate that the parent has been invited. Parents and guardians must also give consent before any other agency representative can be invited. So that's going to be like if you're inviting OOD or a career tech center or somebody that is an outside agency and not a typical IEP team member is invited, going to be providing any information at that meeting. That parent needs to have consent, needs to have given consent to the district for that person's involvement, and that needs to occur prior to the IEP meeting taking place. And you must provide information to the parent so they can give informed consent. So when you're writing the invitation for the child, that is where the purpose of the meeting is involved, and also where you would indicate that an outside agency, who that outside agency is, what they will be discussing. The more information in that, the better, in order to ensure that informed consent is given to that parent. Does anybody have questions about that? What to do before the meeting? Biggest non-compliant component here is just that the child doesn't get invited, and that's really easy to make sure that you cover yourself in that PRO2, as well as after the meeting is over, to indicate in the PRO1 that the child was provided the opportunity to participate via the PRO2 parent invitation. Section 1, future planning. So the future planning part really just starts the discussion about that transition process that you're going to initiate with the student. The future planning drives that transition planning. Like I said, begins a conversation and assists the team in planning for the student's future. Please understand that this is a compliance requirement to include that information in the future planning. Sometimes we ask those questions: what do you want to be when you grow up? And the students might say, being Spider-Man or a TikToker or a YouTuber, or just keep in mind in this part that we're not, none of us got into the business to kind of dash kids' dreams about what they want to do and what they want to be. As they get older, it's going to become a little bit more appropriate and easier to have those conversations, real life conversations about the reality of becoming Spider-Man, or whatever that may be with the student. For just the future planning purposes, the student's input is crucial there. You are also required to have parent or guardian input. If the parent is provided a questionnaire, or you email them, or you have a phone conversation, whatever that may be, just indicate that in future planning. On September 21st, the parent indicated for future planning that they would like to see the student be successful, graduate with their cohort, and participate with non-disabled peers to the greatest extent possible, et cetera, whatever that parent indicates for that student. I think this is also a good opportunity to have real conversations with parents around future planning as well. You can kind of guide those conversations with your questioning or how you construct this section. For instance, a student that might perform low on reading or math, or science, or all of the above, that indicates that they want to be a doctor. That might not be a realistic goal for that student based on limitations they may have in their skills, or physical limitations that an individual may have, but you can kind of narrow the scope of things that the student likes to do in the section by saying, like, okay, you want to work in the healthcare field. Okay, yes. You enjoy helping people. Yes. Do you like, this or that, whatever it may be. And that will really allow you to kind of like hone in on those specific skills and create something further along in the transition plan that might be more realistic to that student. In this section, also summarize the students' skills and interests and consider their long-term goals for themselves. All right. Typically, we don't have this many people. There's about 93 people, it looks like, on here today. So we do a little breakout group discussion. We're just going to give you guys 2 minutes to think about this to yourselves. If you're in a group watching this, please just participate in a conversation or discussion, and then we're going to have somebody share out real quick. A couple people share out about what they discussed or they were thinking about. The Ohio operating standards must state that at minimum transition planning must take place the year a student turns 14. However, best practice indicates this needs to start earlier. In what ways are your schools or districts begun transition planning before the age of 14? So just take a quick minute there, think about what you know about, if you're like a special ed coordinator or supervisor or director or teacher on special assignment, department chair, whatever that may be. Maybe you are more privy to these things in your district, but if you are aware of how transition planning is taking place prior to that 14 years age and requirement, we'd love to hear, just to kind of start some conversations and thinking about people within that future planning component. So go ahead and take a minute, and we will have a couple of people share out, and we will move on.
Is there anyone that wants to share what they're doing to start the transition process a little earlier? If you don't feel comfortable talking out to everyone, feel free to add it to the chat discussion. We can always read it for you.
Anybody have any ideas? Or if you were to construct in the ideal world, a lot of you guys might not get students until they are 14 or already have transitioning in place. Amy from Big Walnut, thank you for sharing in the chat. We encourage all intervention specialists to fill out the future planning and sign and gain some insight in that student, even when they're in elementary school. It does not happen all the time, but in some of our buildings ask questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what do you think you are good at? What do you think you still need to work on? We have asked elementary students and added it's pretty cute what they might say. Heather says, not necessarily as part of the IEP, but we offer career connections courses in the middle schools, which start that conversation. So yes, that career connections piece, and just simply like Amy said, just asking questions also helps get that conversation started and puts into perspective that importance about early planning for students. Is there anybody else that wants to share? All right, real quick, I just wanted to, before we move on, I think Aaron's going to take over. There was a question in the chat box that I wanted to just acknowledge real quick so we don't have to backtrack. Is checking that there will be a discussion about transition on the invite sufficient for getting informed consent for transition assessments? At a absolute bare minimum, yes. However, I don't know how that would hold up in litigation or a dispute resolutions case. The best bet here is to indicate that you're getting consent for AAT. You're informing the parent that age appropriate transition assessments will be taking place, and you can fill that in on that box. We've also had some districts that create their own consent form around age appropriate transition assessment, just so they have that to file. And there's no real like searching for consent. It's right there. Hard copy, parent signed, there. We're made aware of age appropriate transition assessments taking place. Any other questions with that? Any more input that anybody wants to add to the discussion question about early planning? And maybe if your district, or you're not involved in it, if your district is doing it, but if anybody also has any ideas or, in the ideal world, I would like to see whatever that input you want to offer there or not offer, it's totally appropriate.
And I also wanted to add in there too, when you're talking about getting consent for an evaluation for transition services, you can start transition services prior to age 14 as part of a reevaluation or an initial evaluation. There are some age 14, I'm sorry. There are some students that you may want to start transition much younger. And at that point, you could even add that to the ETR process, but understand that it's not required for those students at younger ages.
To answer Miranda's question in the chat about the ELSA, the Employability Life Skill Assessment, if it is an assessment that you are giving to all students, gen ed and special ed, then you would not need that consent. If it is an assessment that you are only giving to a student because you're doing that for the IEP, then you would need that consent. What I have done in the past, and definitely talk with your director, making sure that they would see this as well, but I have always put in as part of my activities for the year prior, writing in, what I'm going to be doing with that student during that IEP year. So if I know during that IEP year that I'm going to be completing the ELSA, then I'll add that as one of my activities in section 5. All right, go ahead and we're going to move on. Transition-focused education. So research has found that post-school outcomes of students with disabilities improves when multiple stakeholders and organizations work together to implement a broad perspective of transition planning or a transition-focused education. So in other words, you shouldn't be doing this alone. This is not the job of an intervention specialist only doing this for the student. This is something that you should be looking at multi-agency support with regards to transition. A strong transition plan or program is not a one and done. You're not doing the same thing for all students. It needs to be truly individualized for that student. It is a process and it takes time. This is not something that if you know the IEP is coming due next month and you're rushing to get it done, that's not a solid transition plan if you're hurrying up to do it. This is something that should take the entire year preparing for that next IEP. But the question that you all are probably asking is, where do you begin? How do you begin? So we'll go on to the next slide. You need to begin with a strong transition program. So this next part of our presentation that I'm going to share with you is about transition programming. When Kim starts her conversation, that's where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how to write a transition plan, looking at goals, looking at activities. For the purposes of my presentation, or my part of this, is just the discussion of transition programming. So what you're seeing on the screen right there is the taxonomy for transition programming 2.0. Paula Kohler, June Kothberg, Catherine Fowler, and Jennifer Coyle developed the taxonomy for transition programming 2.0. These four ladies came together and updated the original model, previously referred to as Kohler's taxonomy for transition programming. So some of you may have heard that one as well. This new model goes right along with the previous model. It has the same 5 primary practice categories. So when you're looking at your screen, you see the 5 boxes. At the top of the boxes, it has the titles of student-focused planning, student development, interagency collaboration, family engagement, and program structures. This 2.0 version, it's kind of hard to see on your screen, but if you look closely, down at the bottom of student development, italicized, it lists student supports in instructional context. That was added in the 2.0 version. Up at family engagement, they added family empowerment and family preparation. Program structures, they added at the bottom school climate. And then that interagency collaboration kind of encompasses all of them, making sure that across the categories, calibration with service agencies, especially vocational rehabilitation, and then emphasizing the importance of those connections prior to and during school and post-school transitions. So essentially what this model is doing is it's providing you with planning, organizing, and evaluation of transition education services and programs. At the bottom of this slide is a link to an OEC live binder, as well as a link to the full taxonomy for transition programming. With the full taxonomy, what it does is it goes into more depth as far as what they're meaning with regards to, for instance, the student-focused planning. You see IEP development, planning strategies, and student participation. When you go to the actual taxonomy for transition programming 2.0 document, it goes into greater detail about what all that represents. You know, what are the things that they're looking for to ensure that that is being provided within your transition program. The live binder at the bottom, the OEC live binder, it's titled Innovative Strategies for Secondary Transition. What's neat about this is the Office of Exceptional Children gathered information from around the state, looking at different ways in which these 5 domains are being addressed with various districts. So if you go into this live binder, which it's open to everyone, you don't need a passcode for it. You may even find your school district submitted documentation that either highlights how you're providing family engagement or what your program structures look like, what type of student development you're providing. It's really kind of a neat way to access that. We'll go on to the next slide. The quality indicators for secondary transition, also known as the QUIST, is something that I just kind of fell into that I found. It's created by Seattle University. What they did is they took that taxonomy for transition programming and they turned it into an Excel document where they can kind of record and look at whether or not their program is meeting the needs of their students, or that they're providing everything they can to best support the students. Keep in mind, this QUIST is based on Kohler's taxonomy. So it doesn't have all the little updated pieces that the taxonomy for transition programming 2.0 has. But I do find that it is kind of a neat way to measure or to do more of a deep dive into your actual program and what you are providing for your students. This is not something that just an intervention specialist would fill out. This is looking at, making sure that you're having your administration look at it, or if you have a transition coordinator, any agencies that you're working with, making sure that they're looking at whether or not you're accessing their programs and services appropriately. It utilizes a Likert scale, so it goes from 0 to 3, and then it calculates and identifies the program's relative strengths, areas of caution, or things that you need to maybe beef up a little bit. And then also those areas of needing a lot of improvement. So I just wanted to share that with you. Again, this is not something that you are required to do. I just think it's a good way for you to look deep into your program and whether or not you are accessing everything that you should be for these students. All right, that Center for Change and Transition Services, that CCTS, the same group that created the QUIST, it's out of the Seattle University. They have created an interactive flow chart to assist teams in the process of transition planning. The flow chart provides links to online training modules, which do a nice job of explaining the various steps of transition planning and services. I like how the flow chart shows the progression with a strong transition plan, starting with conducting those age-appropriate transition assessments, then writing the measurable post-secondary goals, which are based on the age-appropriate transition assessments. And then after you've written the goals, you identify the transition services, which are a coordinated set of activities that the school district or the staff will provide to that student. So I just think it's a nice visual to kind of see the order in which things should be done as you're working on your transition plans. And then at the bottom there, it says that you also identify that course of study, that you write annual IEP goals, and then you coordinate all those services with adult agencies as well. Are there any questions so far? Come on, don't all be shy. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. So as that previous slide showed, starting with those age-appropriate transition assessments. So Ocali has come up with what they refer to as the Ocali AATA Planning Guide. This is brand new. They just released it in August, I believe, of this school year. It has an added emphasis of collaboration with service agencies, especially vocational rehabilitation. And that's pretty much what the AATA Planning Guide really stresses. So the planning guide takes you through the recommended process of transition planning. Each stage of the planning process includes web pages to explain parts of the process, incorporating videos, showing examples, offering reminders, and suggesting tools to help you each step of the way. It also provides a case study for a student named Jessica and how the team would work through the stages with her. The planning guide stresses the importance of a strong network of support and allows those multi-agencies to offer different services and supports during the transition process. I strongly encourage you to take a look at this site. There's a lot of information here. When I first accessed it, I was thinking that it was going to provide us with examples of age-appropriate transition assessments. It does, but that's not the meaning behind this planning guide. The meaning behind the planning guide is to really have you guys look at, or have whoever's doing the transition process, look at the order in which things should be done. Making sure that you're working with a group of people, a team of people to support this individual. Like I shared earlier, it is not just an intervention specialist sitting down with a student to say, all right, what do you want to do when you get older? Do you want to go to college? Where do you want to work? All right, what do you think your strengths are? Where do you need help? It's not that. It's truly looking at who all is working with this child. Include the parents, include any outside agencies that are supporting them, whether that's OOD or county boards of disabilities. Making sure that if they have strong medical needs, that you're including the school nurse. Sometimes parents have outside support staff. So whether that's an in-home caregiver, maybe the child is going to a psychologist and the parent wants them to be a part of their programming. The more people you can get involved to support these students, the better off you're going to be. So that's really what the motivation behind this planning guide is. Like I said, there's a lot of information on this page. It will take you quite some time to kind of go through it all. The great thing is you can stop, you can come back to it. It's not something that you have to sit down and go through hours upon hours listening to things. There's some reading, but like I said, you can access it at any time. There's resources in there. They have documents where you can write out who all the individuals are that are supporting this child. There's information that you could send home to parents to kind of talk through the transition process. So a lot of time and effort went into creating the site. I give major kudos to Ocali. I think they did an outstanding job developing it. So again, I strongly encourage you to get a chance to look at that. The next thing I wanted to show you or talk to you about was just those age-appropriate transition assessments. So it's the ongoing process of collecting data from multiple sources. So as you're collecting this data, you need to make sure that you're including your students' PINs, their preferences, their interests, their needs, their strengths, as they relate to education, to work, to personal living, and to social environments. The student must be included or must be involved to the fullest extent possible. This is not something I know in the group chat, someone mentioned the ELSA. The ELSA is a great document for those of you that aren't familiar with it. The Employability Life Skills Assessment, it's great. What I have found in the past is people just, an intervention specialist filling it out. Maybe the student filling out the student form. But why not have multiple people fill out the ELSA, and then collect all that data together? I think you're going to get a more meaningful result from that to see different environments, how the student is performing, whether that's in the gen ed room, out in the community, whether that's in the intervention room. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. So what are the best practices for completing age-appropriate transition assessments? First and foremost, like I've already said, you need to get that input provided from multiple people. Include the student, the parent, staff, coaches, vocational rehabilitation counselors, an employer, related service personnel. Anyone who's working directly with that student should be included in your AATA practices. Making sure that you're completing multiple assessments, making sure that you're using formal and informal assessments. We'll talk more about the differences or the suggestions for formal and informal when we get to the next slide. So I'm not going to talk anymore about that just yet. Student performance, incorporating student performance in various environments. Like I said, making sure that you're getting information from the classroom setting, from the community. If they have a job out in the community, how are they performing at their work site? Some of our students receive services through Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, and they do job sites in the summer. You should be able to collect that information from the job coach that worked with them. Include that in your AATA of the IEP. Getting information from the home setting as well. Making sure that you're using multiple sources of data. Making sure that as you write this transition section, that it is understood by all team members. Write it in layman's terms. Don't use a bunch of acronyms that people may not understand. So instead of typing in that the student completed on-site job training with OOD, making sure that you're explaining what OOD is. Lastly, we have on there using information that is sensitive to cultural diversity, making sure information is assessed in native language, utilizing an interpreter if you need to, being cognizant of students' beliefs, not shaming them of their beliefs. what they believe in may be different than how you view things, but that's okay. Making sure that you're just being responsive to them and you're being sensitive to how they are presenting themselves or how they are living their life. All right, so I shared that we're going to talk a little bit more about formal versus informal. Make sure that with formal assessments, especially those psychological assessments, that you double check protocols to see if you need to be formally trained in using that assessment. Check with your school psych, maybe they'd be willing to complete a psychological assessment if needed and add that into the document. Look at their ETR. Maybe information was already shared within the ETR that would be beneficial for your AATA. My recommendation is if the ETR was done more than a year ago, you might need some more updated information. So don't want to use things that's too far out. Formal assessments include those aptitude tests, surveys, rating scales, and then, like I said, those psychological assessments. Informal assessments include interviews, interest inventories, questionnaires, interviewing family members, observations, anecdotal records. Again, you want to make sure that you're getting that all done within different environments. So if you're doing an observation, don't just do an observation in a specialized learning center or a resource room, making sure that you're also getting observations in other parts of the school setting as well. At the bottom of this slide is the link for the Ohio AATA library. This is another great resource for you. It provides those formal and informal assessments designed to support transition-aged youth as they work toward life experiences beyond high school. These resources include general assessments for educators, for families and students, assessments for post-secondary employment, college, and independent living, and assessments for health and medical concerns. Are there any questions so far? I kind of went through that a little bit fast, but I have a feeling most of you are probably here to learn the nitty-gritty of how to write goals and activities. So
I put a question in the chat.
all right. Any guidance on using the same exact pins for all three sections? In past, I thought someone said the pins should be relevant to the topic. Pins for education should relate to education. Pins for work should relate to work. You're correct. The pins need to relate to whatever section you're including that information on, making sure that you're identifying what their strengths or needs are with regards to going on to post-secondary education, or with regards to whether or not they're ready for employment or what their plans are with regards to employment. It doesn't make sense to me, at least, to just do one set of pens and say you're done with it. The next section that we're going to be talking about in our group chat here in a minute is all about independent living. So I'm going to go into a lot more detail about that because I think that is something that a lot of us struggle with, making sure that we're completing true age-appropriate transition assessments around independent living to help us determine whether or not an independent living goal is needed.
So when we get an IEP, and I work with IEPs from several school districts, that they've just basically cut and pasted the same exact pins they do a transition assessment and the same exact pins are in all three sections. I've been saying, don't do that. Go back to your assessment, pull the pins that are appropriate for work, pull the pins, for education, like they need to get their driver's license, or, a need would be obtain their driver's license or something. To me, that's a work need. It could be a need for education, could be a need for independent, but those should not all be exactly the same. That's what I've been saying. I don't like to see them all exactly the same, cut and pasted in all three of those sections.
I would agree with you 100%. Obviously, those people have not completed our training today. So I would definitely, moving forward in your district, if a student just moves in and you're seeing that, as long as they're meeting that, I hate to say it, but minimum requirement, it's not a compliance piece. However, best practice would be making sure that you're including the various pins with regards to each of those sections. Okay.
And I'm gonna pop
Thank
in
you.
here. I'm gonna pop in here a little bit on this one too. And I really think it depends on the student though, because you could have some students who are already just about living at that independent level. So their pins are gonna look different than a student who maybe, you know, when they graduate are gonna have to live in a group home. So it really needs to be that independent, and make sure that those pins, exactly what Erin said, align to what the goals are. You can't just arbitrarily have pins and then not address the goal there.
So in our next section, Kim will be reviewing those, writing the transition goals, developing activities, and transition progress reporting. After you complete your age-appropriate transition assessment, that's when you need to help that student to create your transition goal in the area of education, employment, and independent living. Independent living is that goal area that I just mentioned about. Many of us think that we write, you know, it might say as needed, therefore my student only has a reading disability, so they don't need a goal for independent living. But if you really think about it, keep in mind, an independent living goal does not mean a goal focusing on where they're going to live, but rather what skills they may need to develop in order to live independently. So if you think of it that way, then every student should have an independent living goal unless they're living on their own already. Again, this is a my opinion type of a thing. You know, talk to your directors, talk to your transition coordinators to kind of get an idea of what they're thinking. I always went with the idea of, I called them the 5 must-haves for independent living. So if a student has mental health services, if they have behavior needs, daily living skill needs, functional academic skills, or safety concerns, then they're going to struggle living independently. Therefore, that should be included within their independent living goal. So thinking of it that way, what are some AATAs that you have found to be beneficial to use with your students with regards to independent living skills? So if you want to take a minute to kind of think about that, and then we'll ask out again like we did before for anyone to share any of their ideas. But what are some of those age-appropriate transition assessments that you have found to be beneficial to use with your students with regards to independent living skills? Amy had asked if I could repeat those 5 items. Sure. So that was, for me, what I went with was mental health services, behavioral needs, daily living skills, functional academic skills, and safety concerns. I also thought of, if you think of those daily living skills, that would be also with regards to communication, fine motor, gross motor skills. So if these students are receiving services from a therapist in those areas, a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, they should have an independent living goal. There's a reason why they need those services. And chances are they're not going to be able to do things completely independently if they're still receiving those services. Is there anyone that wants to share out what are some of those AATAs?
And Erin, I was starting to type those and then hit enter because, you know, I do that in the chat often. Can you type all those in the chat for people to look?
Oh, sure.
at those?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Again, this is not something coming down, you know, as state support team, we're here to guide you guys and share information with you. These 5 things that I've kind of come up with is something that I did within my previous district. I do feel it's a solid understanding of it, but this is not something I'm not telling you this is what you have to do. I strongly encourage it though. All right, 5 must-haves.
And thank you to those of you who are putting in the chat some different AATAs you found to be beneficial for your students in regards to independent living skills. So if you want to keep adding some of those, some ideas, those would be great for those of you who are part of this training to kind of write some of those down, look and see what might work already with your district. Some of your districts already have some things kind of put into place that you're able to draw from as well.
So people are mentioning student dream sheets, the ARC, the self-determination scale, Casey life skills, self-advocacy, budgeting, seeking, using transportation, time management, appropriate social skills, living with a roommate. These are all great ideas. That Ohio AATA library has a couple of links as well with regards to independent living, which I think is beneficial or for you to kind of look at to get more ideas. For some of our older students who maybe have like a specific learning disability or other health impairment, something that is more of a high incidence type disability, you know, that's where I would maybe suggest doing those interviews, you know, just sitting down and talking with them. What do they know as far as transportation? Do they have their driver's license? If they don't have a driver's license, are they able to bike wherever they want to go within the community? Can they access Uber or Lyft? I don't know too many of our younger kids who maybe access Uber or Lyft, but maybe they know about it. Maybe that's something that their parents utilize. So they're familiar with it. So just talking through some of those things would be very beneficial. Add that information into the AATA section of Section 5. Ohio Means Jobs has some AATA, absolutely. Your AATA section within Section 5 of the IEP should be pretty deep, meaning there should be quite a bit of information there. You also don't want to be giving the same age-appropriate transition assessments year after year after year, unless you're showing that connection across years. So where I came from before, we gave every freshman the employability life skill assessment. We kind of tweaked it a little bit. So instead of just filling out the form, we created a Google document. And within that Google document, we were able to send it off to all of their teachers. As they filled it out, it created that Excel spreadsheet, and then it calculated their areas so that we could do a cross look at where are their greatest areas of needs. Take an average of all the scores, which was kind of a nice way to look at it. And then we waited and we did that ELSA again when they were a senior. And then we could really look at and compare when they started high school versus as they're ending high school, moving on to post-secondary education, graduating, employment. You know, what growth did they have? All right, I'm going to pass it on to Kim.
All right, so we're going to give you guys a short break here. So if everybody would like to take a break, you can get up, move a little bit, and we'll come back at 10 a.m. to kind of finish this up. Okay, we should be getting everybody back here soon. So give everybody here just a few more seconds to join us before we move into the next section, which is actually kind of the nuts and bolts part of the IEP when we're starting to write those goals. We did also put the link for today's presentation back in the chat box. So if you missed it, I know there were some error or some issues with the link that was originally sent out. So hopefully everybody has that now. We were entering it earlier, but if you came in later, you may not have seen it. There was also a question too for a student on the scholarship in the district. So if you have a student with the John Peterson or the Autism Scholarship, it is still the district of residence who is responsible to write the IEPs. And if you're relying on other people to do that AATA, what should you do? My default answer to everything, anytime you're making multiple attempts, is make sure it's in a prior written notice. Put it in that PRO1, make sure you're very clear on how you made the attempts and when you made the attempts. And that way you can clarify the lack of response that you've had, yet you have done your due diligence as the district to try to make sure that you have received that information.
I also bring it up during the IEP meetings, if I was the one doing it, and share with everyone at the table that I attempted to get this information. Oftentimes the parents are like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. We'll definitely take care of that. Go ahead and give it to them to fill out. If you need to, you can always amend the IEP and add it back in. But don't feel like just because you hold the meeting that you don't have to do anything more. If you can get more from the parents, I think that's great.
And that will rely back into that future planning that Steve talked about at the beginning. Make sure you're documenting there as well in that future planning. What does the family and what does the student want? All right, when we move into section 5, remember this has to be done for any student who's going to turn 14 during the life of the IEP. And I think that's really important to remember if they're going to turn 14 during the life of the IEP. So that could mean that you're having students who are 13 that are involved in this process, because during the life of that next IEP, they're going to be turning 14. So you don't wait until after their 14th birthday. It has to be in place on their 14th birthday. Very similar to when you do transfer of rights at majority that you have in all IEPs for students by their 17th birthday. You have to make sure you've received that consent. It's the same type of idea. So prior to their 14th birthday, as long as it's happening during the life of the IEP. So for your post-secondary measurable goal, you want your goal to be very clear to that individual student. I have seen times and places where people just copy and paste from student to student and make them all look the exact same versus actually thinking about what that individual student needs. So when you think about that measurable post-secondary goal, really think about what it is the student needs. And that should all be related back to that age-appropriate transition assessment that you've already given. Your courses of study are going to be whatever the current course of study that your students are working towards. When you talk about the numbers of the annual goals related to your transition needs, those are the goals of their IEP in section 6. So whatever those goal numbers are. Steve, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So when you really talk about this measurable goal, it is based on age-appropriate transition assessment, like I just mentioned. You want to define and project the measurable post-secondary goals. Those post-secondary goals are measurable in a different sense than the annual IEP goals. So IDEA requires that transitions be a results-oriented process, but it's really important to keep in mind that it's a results-oriented process. So one of your goals could be, especially when you're thinking about a senior in high school, would be to obtain gainful employment within 6 months of graduation. You can't guarantee that's going to happen, but that is the goal, working towards that. Post-secondary goals are required to specify the result that is intended and are measurable, and that it can be determined from the affirmative way in which the goal is written, whether the result did or did not occur. So unlike your academic goals or the other goals on the IEP, the annual goals, you are not being held accountable for whether or not the goal was met. Rather, it's going to come back, did you complete the activities to help them achieve that goal? So consider the following. Can the goals be counted? Will the goals occur after the student graduates from school? And based on the information available about this student, does the post-secondary goal seem appropriate for this student? So I'm going to go back to that again and again. The goal should be appropriate to the individual student, just like their annual IEP goals should be. So when you're writing that measurable annual goal, on our next slide, it will give you a little bit of a framework of how you can build that. So you can start off by saying, after high school or after graduation or upon completion of high school, then you specifically name the student. What is that student going to do and where and how? So you really want to think about post-secondary goals are stated to occur after leaving high school. That's why they are called post-secondary goals. Some examples of what that might look like for the post-secondary training and education goals. Upon completion of high school, John will enroll in a business courses at Columbus State Community College. Keep in mind, we're going to go back to that. The district is not accountable if John enrolls, but that is what is appropriate for him now, and that is his goal moving forward. Another example would be after high school, Allison will obtain a 4-year degree from a liberal arts college with a major in child development. Please remember, it's not necessary to specify the student's major for the goal to be measurable, but if that's what the student is sharing with you and that's what you want to include, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure there are several people on this call that started out in college in a different area, and education was not where you were starting, and this is where you ended up. So that's okay. Once again, you're not being held accountable for if they obtained that goal. It's just that is what their current plans are, and that's what we want to tier and target their information on. For the competitive integrated employment, after graduation, Linda will receive job development services from vocational rehabilitation for competitive integrated employment. Or after leaving high school, Jody will obtain a part-time position in a retail environment. Once again, make sure it is relative to the student. Independent living as appropriate. And I'm going to go back to what Erin mentioned before too. So there's always this question because it says right on section 5 as appropriate. When you have done the AATA and you're looking at the pins and you're thinking about what a student might need moving forward, and I'll use my own daughter. Although she was not on an IEP, she just graduated from high school. There are still skills that we had to continue to work on, and we still work on today, her being a freshman in college, working towards living independently. She lives in a dorm with other people. She lives with other people monitoring a lot of the safety pieces involved in living independently. Do I think she could probably live in an apartment on her own and balance all of those? I would like to think so, but the reality is she still needs help on budgeting and knowing how to manage the money that comes in and the money that goes out. So that's where you really want to think about those students. And I know a general rule of thumb that I had always told my staff when I was working in a director of special education position is unless they're living independently already and doing so successfully, there are very few students who would not have that independent living goal. Some examples of that. Upon completion of high school, Jeremy will independently prepare for work each day, including dressing, making his bed, making his lunch, and accessing transportation. After graduating from high school, Justin will use a calendar or device to keep track of his college assignments and personal appointments. Both of those are things that you would be able to work on within the school setting as they're set up. Helping kids learn how to use Google Calendars, things of that nature. So Amy, you said, is that any different than the regular education students? And I would say it depends on your independent student. So some regular ed students, the answer would be No, but I can tell you, when you were talking about my daughter's example, there are very specific skills that I can tell you that she would need. Is she very good at organizing? What I say that she can use a calendar and organize herself? Absolutely. That's one of her absolute strengths. Budgeting, not necessarily. Now she has friends that are very good at budgeting on finances and whatnot, but are not so great on organizing their assignments or tasks that are due. So that's where you really need to think about that independent or that individual student. I hope that answers your question, Amy. I saw that pop up in the chat. When you are writing these goals, you need to remember that the goals must be updated annually. It doesn't always mean that they need to change, but they have to be reviewed. You need to look at those and say, is this what the student needs right now? Is this what they need? What are their greatest needs right now to prepare them for that post-high school experience, whatever that's going to be? You need to think about ways to document and update your review. Your IEP summary notes that indicate discussion and approval of continuation of transition goals. You may need to update with a more detailed, focused, or revised transition goals. And then your new AATA information that aligns with the current post-secondary goals. All of this can be documented in that prior written notice. So there tends to be some confusion sometimes when we talk about what's a course of study. So your course of study is that multi-year description of the needed courses of study that supports the student's vision and future plans. It needs to represent the content needed to prepare and enable the students to achieve the identified life goals. So maybe if a student is planning to go into college and attend a four-year school, which is absolutely okay if that's their goal and their plan and their ambition, then they need to make sure they're taking some college preparatory courses for graduation. Your course of study could also be the curriculum based on Ohio's learning standards. It could be the curriculum based on the Ohio Academic Content Standards Extended, or it could be the career technical program with an identified CTE program. And a really important piece to remember, though, is that you're only picking one course of study. You wouldn't list all of these. You're not going to have a student who's on extended standards as well as the regular standards. So think about and pay attention to what they're doing, and that's what needs to be listed in that course of study section of their goals. It is also an individual decision based on that student's post-school outcomes and individualized needs. It may include a combination of courses and programming, but you still want to focus on that specific course of study. And consider the accommodations and requirements the student may need to help them successfully navigate their course. When we think about the transition services, the term transition services means a coordinate set of activities for a child with a disability that includes instruction, related services, community experiences, the development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives, and when appropriate, acquisition of daily living skills and functional vocational evaluation. So if you notice, we've color-coded those because the color correspond to the education. So when you talk about the education, we're talking about the instruction and related services. When we talk about employment, we're looking at the community experiences, the development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives. And your independent living is the acquisition of daily living skills and functional vocational evaluation. Your transition services also coordinate your activities designed to be a results-oriented process that facilitates the successful movement from school to post-secondary living, employment, education, and training. They're based on the student's preferences, interests, needs, and strengths. So once again, we're addressing those pins specifically. They are based on adult behavior and coordinated so they will reasonably enable the child to meet their post-secondary goals. Transition services can include instruction, related services, community experiences, development of employment, and other post-school living objectives, and when appropriate, daily living skills. And then there's also an indicator 13 on the special education profile as well that will look at that. I did see somebody had their hand raised. If you want to unmute and ask your question, you can do that before we go on any further. Did that individual want to ask a question, or do you think we've answered those?
I did ask a question in the chat. Does it have to be the same course of study across all 3 areas?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You were quiet on my computer and I was trying to turn it up a little bit.
Yeah, does it have to be the same course of study across all 3 areas? So if you
Kim, I think it's the same question in the chat. I can barely hear it as well, but the question is, does it have to be the same course of study across all 3 areas?
So when I think about students I've worked with, and Erin, you can pop in as well here too. I haven't had students that were necessarily working on, for example, extended standards and the more traditional standards. So in that case, I would say, yes, it would be the same course of study across all 3 areas. Where I think you may see a little bit of shift and change might be when you're looking at some CTE and the Ohio learning standards. Erin, do you have, or Steve, do you have anything else you wanted to add there? Or Joe, I know you're on here as well.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I agree too. Yeah, it shouldn't, there's no real like instance where there's like a mix and match where a student would qualify for extended standards and then in math, let's say, and not reading, significant cognitive disability or cognitive disability would, be present in all settings, domains, subjects. It's not really something that comes and goes with where you are or what you're doing. But yeah, like Kim said, the only thing that might change is the if there's career tech programming involved for that student. So that might be an addition to what would be added in to that section.
And I see, Michelle, you kind of popped back in. You were thinking more of those Ohio learning standards and the CTE. I know the district where my children attend, they've started to add like a CTE course. All freshmen are required to take it. So you could see some of that overlap if they're being exposed to those, depending what those needs look like.
And also keep in mind, the course of study can change. So, what they have as their course of study as a freshman may look different than what their course of study is as they're a sophomore, junior, or a senior. I would also suggest talking with the school counselor. They are now required to do graduation plans for all students. Find out what is their intention for graduating. Are they planning on graduating through the CTE program? What SEALs are they looking to earn? Are they planning on going to a 4-year college? If it's a 4-year college, then I would suggest looking at, those post-secondary or preparing them for that post-secondary education.
And then I'm going to piggyback on that. Just another experience that I had previously. We had a student who was planning to move on to a college, and we developed parts of his senior year after his parents had spoken with disability services at the university he was planning to attend. And we were able to coordinate with them as well on what he was going to need to transition into that university setting. And we were able to take some of that information and put it into what some of those goals were, so we could help him be more successful on that transition from high school into that college setting. So when Erin and Steve both mentioned earlier that we bring together all of the people and all of the services that the student has access to, that's where that becomes very important to really think kind of really big picture, very broad of what are those next steps for that student. Okay, on to the transition, or more here with the transition services. So one thing to remember is that the schools are responsible for providing the educational program and transition services stated in the IEP. So when we think about that, we want to talk about instruction, related service, community experience, the functional vocational evaluation, development of employment and other living or other post-school adult living objectives, including acquisitions of daily living skills when appropriate. Steve, can you move that slide forward for me, please? Thanks. And remember that the schools are not responsible for the accomplishment of that specific post-secondary goal. The schools are responsible, though. I'm going to go back to that piece. We're responsible. We as the school districts and are responsible for the instruction piece and providing those opportunities for the student to get all of those transition skills. The transition services and activities must be worded in terms of what the district will do to help the student reach his or her post-school goals. So do not write when you're writing those goals. And I've seen these come in from other districts when I was working in a previous district, indicating what the student will do. We don't want what the student will do. We want what the district is going to do. And that might be the intervention specialist. That might be a school counselor. It might be coordination with some of those outside services, whatever that may be. It's really important that you do not say that the student is going to, for example, independently go and look at all of the videos on the Career Tech website. Now, I'm not saying that's not a good activity when we're thinking about those, but those need to be directed and there needs to be activities aligned to that. It could be that the intervention specialist will guide the students through all the potential options when they're looking at a career technical, and then helping the students complete an independent evaluation of their own skills, of their own knowledge of things that they might want to do, and their own likes and needs, not just sitting a student in front of a computer and saying, go do this and tell me when you're done. So we need to think about how to extend that for the student and what is the school doing.
I would also add in here that as you are writing these activities, like Kim had shared, it's what the district is providing to that student. And I know we've stressed about making sure that you have that interagency collaboration and that you're getting feedback and input from the various agencies working with that child. Rather than saying opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities will meet with the student, twice a year. Well, we can't control that as a district, but if we write it in there, then we're responsible for that, making sure that it happens. So I just want you to be aware and make sure that the way that you word this is something that you as a district or that you as the intervention specialist are actually able to control. I've seen it where people put the school counselor will sit down with the student and, work on scheduling or whatever it might be. Well, if that doesn't happen, which I hope it would, but if that didn't happen, then you're non-compliant because it didn't happen. So making sure that you're wording it in a way that it's something that you can say, yes, it happened, or no, it didn't happen.
All right. Does anybody have any questions about that part so far? I want to kind of stop there. I know we've asked a couple as we've gone on. Any other questions anybody has right now?
I have a question.
Mhm.
So just from what Aaron just talked about with the OOD services, we have several kids that receive services, and I typically write the transition coordinator will facilitate meetings with OOD and then say the service. But that still kind of leaves you on the hook if the meetings don't happen. Do you have a suggestion of how to write those services in if they're receiving them from OOD?
So I think like what you just shared of saying that you're going to facilitate of setting up that meeting. I personally would think that that would be fine because you can facilitate that. You can attempt to set it up. When Kim starts talking about how we write progress on this, you could write in your progress, reached out to OOD coordinator to set a meeting date, contacted parents, scheduled it on this date. If it didn't happen, then, you could write in there that it was rescheduled. Maybe you could say, something along the lines of it was rescheduled. This is what we talked about. You just need to make sure that you're writing it, like I said, in a way that you can say, yes, this happened, or no, this didn't happen. Did that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
So I already am like thinking through some of this before I even ask it, but there are times when maybe an OT is providing a service, or the intervention specialist or transition coordinator. So what would you think about leaving it more general as far as, the special education staff is going to, provide instruction in? The thing I think of with that is that it's vague and not like maybe someone's thinking, oh, somebody else is going to take care of that, or, it's not so clear on who's going to be giving it. But I'm wondering what you think about that. Like, is it okay to do a more broad statement of who's going to be providing the services, or should it be very specific?
I would lean towards more specific, because you want to make sure that the person who's providing that service, number one, is being held accountable, but we also want to make sure that we all understand who's providing it. So when I think about maybe like an orientation and mobility assistant, for example, that could be on, or I'm sorry, not an assistant, but you guys know what the teacher, helping a student learn to access their environment, crossing the road, those things of that nature. An intervention specialist doesn't have that same training that an orientation and mobility instructor would have. So you would want to be very clear when you're talking about that independent living. And I've seen those especially written when, like, our students that are Ohio School for the Deaf or Ohio School for the Blind, how are they going to manage their environment? And you want those people who are providing that specialized instruction to really be the ones that are doing that, so it's all done safely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, so now we're going to talk about progress reporting. I will tell you, we did an IEP training last week, and I was a little bit surprised when we had somebody say, you mean we have to report on progress for transition? The answer is yes. There's no way around it. You must report on progress for the transition goals at the exact same time you do on every other goal. So there is a requirement to report on progress. And there is an optional form. When you go to ODE's site and you look up all of the forms for IEPs and ETRs, there are required forms and there are optional forms. That doesn't mean that this form is optional to not do it. It just means that you don't have to use the state's form. Your district may choose to use a different form. I know that in the program that we used in my previous district, we had two different options for transition progress reports that were both pushed out by the state in there. And so we made a decision as a district of which one to use. But then a neighboring district chose to use the other one. Neither was right or wrong, because they were both reporting on progress based off of that district's expectations. There are some districts who choose to. I have never seen one who does, but I do know that they're out there. I've heard of people doing it. I just haven't seen them myself, that they choose to create their own progress report. I would encourage you just to use one of the templates that the state of Ohio has put out. They should already be loaded into whatever your student information services software is, whether you're using Same Goal or IEP Anywhere, Infinite Campus, student information systems, or special services through Progress Book. They should already have templates loaded into those. My recommendation is that you would just use one that's already there, but that really is a district decision. So speak to your director in your district to determine how you're going to respond or report on that progress. They also, progress reports for transition goals have to be reported at the same frequency as the annual goals. So if your district is doing them just once a quarter when grade card comes out, that's fine. If they are doing it though, that they also provide interims, then you have to provide progress reports not only on transition, but the annual goals every time like the midterm progress reports are sent out. And they could also be defined as a different time frame as well, if that's what the IEP team determines is what is needed. All right. So we have another short video here. It's only a couple minutes. It's from the Office of Special Education Programs and their definition and explaining what indicator 13 is through there.
Steve, are you pulling it up or do you need us to?
No, I'm pulling it up, just trying to connect the audio. Are you able to see the webpage?
Yes.
Okay.
EA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Its intent is to prepare students for future education, employment, and independent living.
We can't hear it now.
And to mandate transition planning as part of the IEP process. PEPNET data shows that compared to hearing peers, deaf adults are underemployed and underpaid. They do not feel
Jump
that
to 125.
promotion and reveal disparities in their career advancement. According to the US Census in 2011, only 47.9% of deaf adults were employed. Secondary transition planning should be a bridge from school programs to participating in opportunities in adult life. Minnesota statute states that transition planning from school to adult life begins at the latest during grade 9. The transition plan must address the needs for transition from secondary services to post-secondary education and training, employment, community participation, recreation and leisure, and home living. In 2007, the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSAP, required states to develop a comprehensive state plan on 20 specific indicators that measure student outcomes. Indicator 13 measures the percent of IEPs that include appropriate measurable post-secondary goals, age-appropriate transition assessments, transition services, courses of study, annual IEP goals related to the student's transition services and needs, and evidence that the student was invited to the IEP meeting. These requirements make up the essential components in a student's IEP when they reach transition age. So how
Thanks, Steve, and he'll get the presentation back up. The entire video, if you want to watch all of it, is linked into the documents that we sent out to you if you wanted to go back and watch the whole element and piece to that. Does anybody have any questions about progress reports at this point? All right, so the next thing we're going to move to is the indicator 13 checklist. So there's a special education profile that is sent out annually, and it is reviewed by the state for each district across the state of Ohio. And indicator 13 is looking at those transition goals. This is an optional form to be used, and it's something that is a good kind of way to go back and double check and make sure you have everything you need in your transition goals. So question number 1, is there an appropriate measurable post-secondary goals in this area? Can the goals be counted? Will the goals occur after the student graduates from school? And based on the information available about this student, does the post-secondary goals seem appropriate for the student? And you could then break down those 3 areas. So when we talk about education and training, employment, and independent living, and you would be able to answer a yes/no question down through those. Are the post-secondary goals updated annually? Was the post-secondary goal addressed, updated in conjunction with the development of the current IEP? So make sure when you're doing that annual review every year, you're going back and looking at progress a student has made on those post-secondary goals and updating the IEP accordingly. And is there evidence that the measurable post-secondary goal will enable, sorry about that, I jumped around on myself. Is the evidence that the measurable post-secondary goals were based on age-appropriate transition assessment? Do you have that AATA in there? Is it clearly defined, and are the results clearly defined for those individual students? And then, are there transition services in the IEP that will reasonably enable the student to meet his or her professional or post-secondary goals? So make sure you're very clear on all of those. And that's just kind of a checklist for yourself to make sure you have everything you need.
Steve, can you go back, oh, sorry, real quick to that progress report example that we showed? Is there any way to make that a little bigger? I don't know if there is, maybe there's not. I just wanted to touch on looking at this optional form. You know, at minimum, you could say not reported, in progress, completed. Do you meet the requirements of doing progress? Then yes. However, best practice would be, like I had shared, making sure that you kind of write something in there about what it is that you guys did. Keep in mind, your activities do not necessarily have to go along with the beginning and end date of the IEP itself. Your activity, if you're putting in there that you know you're going to be sitting down and working with a student on completing some of those AATAs in preparation for next year's IEP, you know, you're not going to do that within the first couple of weeks of writing this new IEP. You'll probably do that closer to the end of the year, closer to when the IEP is coming due. So you could put a start and end date for your specific activities as, you know, let's say their IEP is due in the fall. Maybe you're going to make your activity something that you're going to work on that last quarter of the school year. So maybe beginning in March, between March and May, you're going to work on that activity. If that's the case, each quarter that you're reporting progress, you need to specify whether or not you did it. It's okay to say that it was not done at that time, or you could say it's in progress. Here's how we worked on it. As soon as you complete it, then you can just mark in there that it was completed and what the result was, if that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that your activities don't have to be year-long activities. They could be specific for whatever the activity is. If you're going to be working with the student on organizational skills, you know, defining how often are you going to work with them on those organizational skills. You don't want to say as needed. You need to specify what is needed. So whether you're going to work with them monthly on it, quarterly on it, semesters, each semester, whatever the case might be, you want to be specific in that sense. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I just wanted to go back.
No, you're fine. And that does go back to when you're writing those, and Steve, you don't need to go back and find this slide, but back on the very first slide that I had up when I started speaking, and it talks about that projected beginning date, projected end date. They could be the life of the IEP, but they don't need to be. It could be that you are taking, for example, maybe your sophomores to go visit a career tech center, and that's just something that your school district does with the local career tech center. So what is the intervention specialist going to do prior to that? Maybe you know that you're going to go in February, so your projected beginning date could be before that. Your projected end date could be that end date of February. And what are you going to do to prepare that student to go visit particular courses that might be of interest to them? So that's where, when Erin is talking about that projected beginning and projected end date, notice it says projected. So if you missed that date a little bit within those, you're not a compliance piece, because you could be scheduling to go in February and you have an Ohio snowstorm and you don't get to go, and then you don't go until April. You just want to be clear on that progress report when that happened, or if it didn't happen, just so that you're always making sure. That's where your compliance measure is going to come in, is being able to document what you have or haven't done.
And I love that Kim brought up the visiting of career centers. I know that's something in years past I would see in a lot of IEPs that, you know, the intervention specialist will ensure that the child is scheduled to attend the career center on October, blah, 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 whatever it might be. Well, every sophomore is doing that. So it's not individualized to that kid of what that kid's doing. So make sure that your activities are not general activities that everyone's going to be doing. It needs to be specifically for that kid. So the way I would write it is, in preparation for visiting the career center, the intervention specialist will sit down with Johnny, you know, 2 times or 1 time, whatever it might be, to look at and review the programs at the career center to decide which programs he's going to go visit when he attends in October with the sophomore class.
Yes, exactly. It's what is the intervention specialist going to do to help make that student. So they're not just going, I'm going to go where my buddy's going, but really what is something that's going to help prepare them. So Beth asked, any guidance on using one occurrence for the frequency? I think it's going to depend on what that is. I have seen where some people say, you know, 1 time per year, and that could be where the intervention specialist is the one sitting down, for example, and helping to update the graduation plan versus the school counselor. I would be hesitant that you're only going to do something 1 time. We want to kind of think about that, but I'm not going to say it would never be used. Aaron or Steve, do you have anything else that you
I
want
would agree with, I would agree with that. When you're looking at that, the programming that I was talking about earlier, and really looking at the way your district is running things and doing things, you know, think about these activities that you're saying that you're going to be working on the student. How beneficial is it really? You know, if it's something that you're just going to do 1 time, is that a strong transition activity? Maybe, maybe not. I think it just depends. Any resources, surveys geared towards students with higher needs, nonverbal, lower IQ. In that Ohio AATA website, which this page that we're showing right now are links to resources. We will add in there the link from today. I could do that for you guys when you guys click on the materials. But the AATA, it does have some things. There's like a pictorial interest inventory that you could do. Oftentimes, at least in my experience with some of the nonverbal or students with lower IQs that you may not be able to get as much out of, I think that's where you really need to access that multi-agency of support, making sure that you're getting the input from everyone that's working with that individual child.
I would also say to go and look at the resources from Ocali as well. Those resources there are several resources in there for your students who may be nonverbal, that lower IQ as well. So those are great resources. As Steve's kind of hovering around on this page, the ODE Universal Support Materials. So at the beginning, and when you signed up for this, you notice this was called a Tier 2 training, right? Tier 2 being that Tier 1 are those universal support materials that the Ohio Department of Education puts out. So that's what everybody in the state of Ohio has access to. Kind of like when you think about an RTI process and you think about those tiers. So level 2, which is where we are now, is a little bit more direct, a little bit more instruction, a little bit deeper dive than what you're going to get from ODE's universal support materials. Just wanted to kind of clarify if there's still some questions. That's a great place for you to go back and look, excuse me, at some of those materials that are already out there from the state of Ohio. And they offer them on several different topics, not just transition. Does anybody have any additional questions for us?
I'm also going to add into the chat a website for Zero Institute. They offer a couple of different transition ideas geared more towards those students with higher needs. There is a cost to it though. So that's why we didn't necessarily include it in our slides. We want to provide you guys with as much information as we can that's not going to cost you any money. But they do offer some AATA support in that way, where you can individualize it to students with some of those higher needs. It's a newer part of it's called TAG. It's a newer part of their programming, but I would definitely have you take a look if you can. They do offer a account that's free for you to trial it to see if it's something that you would need. And then I think the cost of it is maybe $3 per activity. I'm not quite positive on that, but I will throw that in the chat if you want to take a look.
All right, and I also just put in there the survey link as well. To receive your CEU credits, you need to complete the survey, and it should email you within a matter of a minute or two once you've completed that survey. to get your certificate of completion to turn into your districts or whoever is monitoring that, or for your LPDC credit to get your CEUs for today, your contact hours for today. So we're wrapping up here at the end. There are several different offerings that the ESC of Central Ohio does offer. We are also very much open. You'll see in that survey link there'll be a question. What would you look like in the future? I know that Aaron and I are both new this year, and we've been meeting with Steve regularly about what we can offer differently for next year. So we are already planning some different professional development opportunities for our region, beginning with next school year. I'm not sure how many more will get added in this year because there's already a pretty heavy load of things that are already developed. You guys are welcome to sign up for any of our offerings. Anything offered by the state support team are always free of charge to the districts. There is no cost for people to attend those. If there's anyone on here, we are running a new intervention specialist academy as well. We had our first meeting on Monday. That wasn't in person. If you didn't come to that first meeting, that's perfectly fine. You can still sign up through Ohio ID to look for those as well, and attend our other sessions. We have 3 virtual sessions and then 1 more in-person session as well. So whatever works best for you, you may certainly do so. For our special education directors that are on here, we have our COSEs, the Central Ohio Special Education Administrator meetings that are held. I believe we have 3 left remaining this year. It might only be 2. I'm trying to remember now off the top of my head. We did have one already. And those are just special education administrators around the region coming together and talking about different topics. We are also hosting ESELA, the Emerging Special Education Leadership Academy with in partnership with Bricker and Eckler, a law firm. And you can go see what all of those are. And even if you are a longtime special education administrator or somebody who would be interested in hearing some more of the legal background behind some of those, all of the topics are listed, and you don't have to sign up for the whole program, although you are more than welcome to do so, but you can also choose individual service or individual sessions as well. Those also will be registered for as through the Your Ohio ID. And there, Steve just put in here our trainings. And so if you go to our website, you'll be able to see those very specific websites that are offerings that we have, and you can search for a variety of different topics as well. This presentation will be has been recorded, as you guys were aware. We will upload it onto our SST-11 website, as well as there's the specific PDF, I think is what Steve was trying to put out of all the offerings that we are going to have, that we are offering this year so far. And then our IEP and ETR trainings that we had last week as well will also be uploaded onto our state website, which is great. There are podcasts that are out there. We're in the process. We just had one uploaded, and then we have some other speakers coming in as well that you can go and listen to those podcasts, get additional information. So there's a lot of resources out on our website that we encourage you to go see. You can also, if you choose to, subscribe to the SST-11 newsletter that comes out as a blast newsletter. I believe those come out monthly. They've sent out the one for September, but all of the archived ones are also available on the website. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to get more information as needed. So we have about 10 minutes left here. You are welcome to go ahead and leave if you don't have any questions, or if you have individual questions or questions for the group, feel free to unmute yourself, and Aaron and Steve and I will do our best to answer your questions. Thank you all very much for attending today. We appreciate it. And don't forget to complete that link so that you can get credit for today.